Nigeria's disputed 2023 presidential election. But from Monday, the combatants will enter the final phase of that tussle. 3 separate appeals have been listed against the judgment of the Presidential Election Tribunal, which affirmed the Electoral Commission INEC's declaration of President Tinubu as the winner of the election held on February the 25th. The applications for a review of that ruling have been made by Atiku Abubakar of the People's Democratic Party, or PDP, Peter Obi of the Labour Party, and the Allied People's Movement, or APM. While Atiku presented 35 grounds on which he's asking the court to nullify the judgment of the tribunal, Obi has presented 51 grounds of appeal from the outset. Great to see you, Godfrey, and thank you very much indeed for joining us. So the process for the Atiku and Obi appeal begins on Monday, the final appeal. What is actually going to be happening on Monday?
Well, good evening, Charles. Thanks. It's quite an honor having me on your show tonight. Basically, it's going to be another round of fireworks. So, of course, we expected that after what happened at the Presidential Election Petition Court on the 6th of September, when the 5-member panel headed by Justice Haruna Samani gave this an exhaustive and, if you like, exhausting 14-hour judgment on the 3 petitions, that of the Allied People's Movement and then the PDP's presidential candidate, Atiku Abubakar, and Peter Obi of the Labour Party. One would have thought that the fireworks would have ended there. The judges, the 5 judges, in a unanimous decision, dismissed all 3 petitions for lacking in merit. They gave grounds to seek to nullify the electoral victory of Bola Tinubu at the presidential polls. But the judges felt those grounds lacked merit. But one would have thought that after that, the whole legal tussle would have ended at that point. But of course, that isn't the case. They're moving into the final stage where the final battle line has now been drawn. Now we're having the same set of appeals still heading to the higher court, because Peter Obi of the Labour Party and the Allied People's Movement felt they were the judges or the Presidential Election Petition Court didn't do justice to their appeals, to their petitions rather. So they want to take the court, their appeals, their petitions a notch higher to get a different opinion, most likely, that perhaps may lead to the nullification of the electoral victory of Bola Tinubu. But then, of course, Atiku Abubakar of the 3 seems to have taken a different approach, approaching the United States District Court to get documents, academic records of President Bola Tinubu to give more like an extra edge, a leverage to his own case. But this time around, he's taking a different approach because he feels perhaps the Supreme Court may just affirm the decision of the Presidential Election Petition Court. So he wants to take a different approach, to look at it from the angle of forgery of the, on the part of Bola Tinubu, Nigeria's president. That is, in terms of the documents, that academic records which President Bola Tinubu submitted to INEC with respect to his seeking election for Nigeria's highest office. Of course, if that stands, that will prove to be a huge upset on Atiku's part, because it has never happened in the history of Nigeria where a sitting president was removed by a court. When that could have happened was in 2007, when Edward, the then late Nigerian president, was elected. He faulted the election that saw him come into office, but that too didn't give enough grounds for the court to dismiss him. But this time around, we are seeing Atiku take a different approach and is very much poised to have him, record an upset, as the things are. That is what some analysts seem to be saying, and so his supporters, because he's taking a different approach. He's moving a notch higher from the petition with which he approached the Presidential Election Petition Court. So he's now saying that the court needs to look at his case more thoroughly,
right,
to see perhaps he may just nick it at that point.
Well, obviously we don't know that yet, but and even before we get to that stage, Godfrey, I mean, I'm assuming that that there will need to be fresh evidence submitted to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court accepting that fresh evidence. But we don't know yet whether the Supreme Court will admit that new evidence, do we?
Well, it is still a very an open situation as it is, because Atiku is relying on Order 2, Rule 12, subsection 1 of the Supreme Court rule. You know, more like its regulation. This is what spells out how matters that comes to it are approached. You know, in terms of how evidences are tendered before it to be heard. So this rule of the Supreme Court affords him an opportunity to bring in new evidence. But of course, like you stated, it's still subject to the discretion of the apex court. Atiku has tried at this point, and then relying on this, it's still a 50-50 chance that the court may admit that those fresh evidence emanating from Chicago State University, these are depositions by the registrar of the university, which is now giving Atiku's case a fresh feel, as it were, if you like, in respect to approaching his quest to seek the nullification of President Bola Tinubu's election.
Right. Okay, well, how long, Godfrey, is this process expected to last? I mean, when can we expect a verdict from the Supreme Court? I mean, there is a time limit, isn't there, within which the appeals must be concluded?
Yes, the Supreme Court has 60 days within which to determine these electoral matters. Of course, to recall that the decision of the Presidential Election Petition Court was delivered on the 6th of September. So it has exactly 2 months within which to decide on this. So 6th of November, as it is, I'm sure, yes, by 6th of November, this appeal should be expiring, because that will be exactly 2 months from when the decision was given at the Presidential Election Petition Court. So from 23rd of October, when the appeal will be heard, it will have about, let's say, 2 or so weeks within which to decide. So 6th of November, on or before 6th of November, the Supreme Court is expected to deliver its verdict on the 3 appeals, that of Atiku Abubakar or the PDP, Labour Parties, Peter Obi, and of course the Allied People's Movement.
Briefly, Godfrey, I wonder what the arguments, I mean, if you can summarize just very briefly. I know you talked about Atiku and the certificate issue, but beyond that, I mean, what are the arguments being put forward by Atiku and by Obi? What is the basis of their challenge of the ruling of the Presidential Tribunal, which, as you said earlier, found in favor of President Tinubu?
Well, of course, there are a number of issues. Of course, some of them stand out. We have the 25% votes, 25% votes of the FCT, which of course is the field that should have been given the knockout punch to the Tinubu presidency, and then the alleged forfeiture due to the forfeiture of 460,000 naira due to drug trafficking, alleged drug trafficking, as it were. And then the issue of dual citizenship. These are some of the grounds that the Presidential Election Court, and then we have the dual nomination with regards to the APM, and of course the Peter Obi, in their petitions. So these are some of the key aspects that they are seeking to put forward, or that they were seeking to put forward with respect to these appeal that we're likely to be hearing at the presidential at the Supreme Court. Of course, these were those matters that were dismissed by the Presidential Election Petition Court on grounds of lacking in merit. But then they will be reappearing at the Supreme Court, apart from the CSU document, which is making a fresh entry.
Godfrey, thank you very much in Offsite Studio. Well, to help us make further assessments, I'm joined now in the studio by the journalist, political affairs commentator, and a Rise News analyst, Constance Ikoku. And later we'll be joined by the legal practitioner and former member of the APC Presidential Campaign Council, Barrister Rilwan Obanachi. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. A potentially approaching politically explosive moment, whatever the Supreme Court's decision turns out to be.
You're correct. Whether it turns out to be in favor of the president or against the president, I think each camp, it's been a very divisive journey getting up to here, and everybody wants to win. But at the end of the day, one person has to win. I mean, it was a keenly contested election, and now we're here. I think it's imperative to say that the Supreme Court is like the body that is the ultimate authority in legal matters in a country. And it is also the cornerstone of the political system and the social system in any country. What this means is that a lot rests on its shoulders. A lot of people look up to it because they see it as the final step in a country where they hope to seek justice and get justice. If the politicians cannot give out justice, then it should happen at the Supreme Court, apart from having gone through the lower courts. So the issue now is, will the Supreme Court, like the correspondent said, admit the fresh evidences? Because the lower court has already dismissed literally everything that they were, the cases that they were advancing or they had advanced. And so the Supreme Court is not a court to begin to judge the issues. It's just going to make the final decision. So he said it's going to be at their discretion. So their discretion is either going to be about the interpretation of the law, is it going to be about saving the country, is it going to be about, you know, thinking about the situation, the political situation in the country and trying to do something different in order to keep it together. So it's a lot that's resting on their shoulders, and everyone is waiting to see what this judgment will be next week.
I mean, I was going to say, of course, that, well, the judgment is going to be next week, obviously, but it's the process starts next week. I mean, but of course, to take what you're saying further, all eyes will be on that Supreme Court, both in Nigeria and abroad. Enormous global interest in that appeal.
Absolutely. I mean, when you look at the whole of the African continent, so many people have been following the happenings in Nigeria. I mean, elections now are global. Other African countries come here and observe the elections. Europeans come here and observe the elections. So all eyes on Nigeria. Why? Because Nigeria is the biggest country on the continent and is, of course, the biggest democracy on the continent. And then now you have a president who is the chair of ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States. So people are looking and saying that Nigeria should be an example for the rest of Africa in terms of democracy, in terms of fairness, in terms of justice, in terms of the protection of individual rights. So the way that Nigeria goes has larger implications for the continent. But apart from that, for the Supreme Court, whatever decision it makes also has legal and political implications. Why? Because it shows the values of the country. It shows the values of the system. It reflects what the country is. And then it also would shape policy direction. It will shape the perspectives of people about the country they live in. It would affect maybe their patriotism, whether they continue to believe in their country or not. It has a lot of, ripple effect, this particular judgment. And I think that the judges already know that. They read what is going on in the country, they read the news, and they follow the news. And I think they already know that all eyes are on them at this point.
Right. Well, I just need to say that the man we were waiting for is finally here. He strolled in a hot second, ago. He's a legal practitioner and former member of the APC Presidential Campaign Council, Barrister Rilwan Obanachi. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. We've been talking about the start of the process, the final process of appeal at the Supreme Court next week. Obviously, you're a lawyer, so you know what to say and what not to say. But I mean, all eyes on that case next week.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, all eyes on the case. But if we are to be guided by, you know, the previous decisions of the Supreme Court, I don't think there's any cause for alarm.
You mean cause for alarm from your perspective?
No, similar cases. You see, our judiciary is different from the system in U.S. and other nations. There's what we call stare decisis, judicial precedents. And if the Supreme Court is bound by its own previous decision, as far as the previous decision of the Supreme Court is concerned, there's no problem. Look at it critically. As to how to prove election malpractice, there's a precedent on that. As to how to prove overvoting, there's a precedent on that. And the Court of Appeal has made a very clear pronouncement that yet you allege that there was election malpractice, there was overvoting, yet you could not particularize it. On that basis, the position was thrown out. Maybe people are carried away by the new, you know, information that is coming in,
right,
by way of an application to bring in fresh evidence. I think it's as good as chasing, you know, shadows, because one, for you to file election petition in Nigeria under the Constitution, you have 21 days, you know, after the election, including the day of the declaration. Now, and you cannot amend your petition outside that 21 days. And now you are the Supreme Court. The implication of what Atiku is seeking to do is to amend this petition.
Not necessarily.
No, because you are bringing, for instance, that issue was not part of the ground of his petition. Now you are trying to bring in another ground at the Supreme Court.
Yeah, but it's at the discretion of the
Supreme Court. It is not allowed. The Supreme Court has no discretion as far as this issue is concerned.
Well,
it has no discretion.
We shall wait, because so we don't go into areas.
No, that's why I told the judicial precedent. I'm a lawyer.
I understand.
And I'm coming from my background.
Sure.
Supreme Court has no discretion as far as this issue is concerned.
Well, I mean, different legal opinions have been expressed, and obviously the people who are taking the case to the Supreme Court and filing the fresh evidence are lawyers as well. So clearly they've got their own interpretation.
They know the end from the beginning.
Right.
They know the outcome. What will be the outcome? And they are just playing to the gallery. They are just playing to the gallery.
Sure.
The law is very clear and explicit. The Supreme Court, in ordinary situation, has power to admit fresh evidence when there is, you know, cogent reason for doing that.
Right.
But election petition, like we said, and which of course is banner, that it is peculiar in nature. You understand? Therefore, it requires peculiar and special handling.
Well, we shall
you
wait.
Understand?
We'll wait to see
so in
what
sui generis,
interpretation.
election petition is sui generis.
We'll
it's not treated like ordinary cases. In ordinary cases, the Supreme Court can admit fresh evidence.
Right.
But in election petition, the Supreme Court will not do that. Especially that the fresh evidence sought to be brought is going to touch on the grounds of the petition, which is already outside 180 days, and even 21 days, you have to file election petition. Let us be, you know, sincere with ourselves.